My husband said he was going back to his hometown to visit his sick mother. But when I called him, he forgot to hang up the phone. That was when I heard him say, "Just wait until the $15 million check from her father clears. I'll leave that stupid wife of mine with nothing. Then we'll get married and raise this child together." I was in shock. It turned out my husband was with my own best friend, who was pregnant with his child. At that moment, my world completely collapsed. But I did not stay silent. I made sure they would regret this betrayal. Before the story begins, please write in the comments section where you're watching the story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so the Midnight Tales channel can continue to grow and bring you even more gripping stories. The beginning. The morning atmosphere inside the grand house felt warm and peaceful, as if no storm was about to crashing down. Sunlight streamed gently through the slightly open curtains, illuminating the elegant living room filled with luxurious furniture. There, Elena Morgan was carefully folding her husband's clothes. The woman, wearing a soft shawl, worked with patience and love. Today, her husband Daniel Morgan was supposedly leaving for his hometown to visit his mother, Mrs. Helen Morgan, who was said to be critically ill. As a devoted wife, Elena felt deeply worried about her mother-in-law's condition. She actually wanted to come along, but Daniel forbade her, claiming the long road trip would be exhausting and he didn't want her to get tired, especially since she had just recovered from a mild flu. Elena obeyed without hesitation. She believed Daniel truly cared about her health. Daniel stepped out of the bathroom, his hair still damp. His face looked fresh, yet he wore a carefully crafted expression of sadness. He approached Elena, who was placing the last folded shirt into a leather travel bag. Elena looked up at him lovingly and gently rubbed her arm, offering silent support. She knew how much Daniel loved his mother, and the news of her illness must have been devastating for him. She prepared snacks and bottled water for his journey, making sure his wallet, phone, and other essentials were safely packed. Not a single trace of suspicion crossed her mind. To her, Daniel was the perfect husband, hardworking, kind, and family-oriented. In their 3 years of marriage, he had always been gentle and attentive. Never once had he shown any strange behavior. On the front porch, Daniel hugged Elena tightly, as if leaving her for even a few days was unbearable. He kissed her forehead for a long time and reminded her to take care of herself, lock the gates, and not to wait up if he returned late the day after tomorrow. Elena nodded obediently. She slipped some cash into his pocket, telling him it was for medicine or souvenirs for his mother. Daniel smiled softly, thanked her sincerely, then got into his car. Elena stood at the doorway, waving until his car disappeared around the corner of their elite residential complex. Her heart suddenly felt empty. Still, she brushed it off and prayed for his safe journey and for her mother-in-law's recovery. The call that changed everything. Time passed. Morning turned into afternoon, and afternoon slowly faded into evening. Elena spent her day reading in the family room and tending to her plants in the backyard. As the sun began to set, worry and longing crept into her heart. According to the timeline, Daniel should have nearly arrived by now. She decided to call him just to make sure he was safe. The call rang for a while before Daniel finally answered. His voice sounded noisy, his breathing slightly rushed, as if he were walking quickly or carrying something heavy. He told Ameda he had just arrived and that the signal was bad. He said he needed to hang up to help relatives take care of his mother. Understanding as always, Elena agreed and said goodbye. But then something strange happened. The call didn't disconnect. Elena was about to hang up when she heard rustling sounds, followed by a car door slamming. She heard footsteps echoing against ceramic tiles, not dirt roads or asphalt like in a rural town. Then she heard laughter. Daniel's laughter. Not sad, not worried. It was carefree, victorious. Her heart began to pound. Then Daniel spoke clearly, as if the phone was lying on the table beside him. He complained about finally being free from acting all day. And then came the sentence that shattered everything. He mocked Elena, calling her a fool, and said she was only useful until the $15 million check from her father cleared. After that, he planned to abandon her with nothing. Elena's chest tightened, her breath caught in her throat. Before she could even process the pain, a woman's voice chimed in. A voice she knew too well. It was Claire Bennett, her own best friend. Claire laughed, agreeing with Daniel, saying Elena really was stupid for never realizing what was happening behind her back. Elena's world collapsed. Claire was pregnant with Daniel's child. They talked about their future, about buying a luxury home, traveling overseas, raising their child together using money earned from Elena's father's hard work. Daniel admitted he was sick of pretending to be a faithful, religious husband. He hated listening to Elena's father lecture him about ethics and business. The only reason he stayed was the inheritance and fake investment funds he'd proposed to Elena's father. Claire mocked Elena's modest fashion sense, calling it boring and outdated, unlike her, who always looked irresistible to Daniel. Every word was a knife. Elena slid down onto the floor, her back against the sofa, phone still recording everything. She heard glasses clinking, celebrating their betrayal. After nearly 10 minutes of unbearable tension, Daniel said he needed to end the call so Elena wouldn't get suspicious. Elena stopped the recording just seconds before the call finally disconnected. Silence filled the house, but this silence was terrifying. The birth of revenge. Elena stayed on the floor for hours, letting her tears dry on her cheeks. The pain slowly transformed into a cold, calculated fury. She replayed the recording again and again. Each insult erased the love she once had for Daniel. She remembered how Claire often praised her kindness, how Claire frequently borrowed money, how Claire attended every family gathering. It all made sense now. Elena stood up, washed her face, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked fragile, but her eyes were sharp. She adjusted her shawl. If she confronted them now, Daniel would deny everything. He was manipulative. He would twist the truth. She needed more than a recording. She wanted total destruction at the very peak of their arrogance. Elena picked up her phone and called the only man powerful enough to help her, her father, a respected senior businessman, fiercely protective of his only daughter. When he answered, Elena steadied her voice and asked him to meet her immediately. She told him this concerned the life and death of both the company and her marriage. Hearing the seriousness in his daughter's voice, Mr. Richard Morgan agreed to come without asking many questions. Elena knew that involving her father was a dangerous move. His fury alone could destroy Daniel's career overnight. But Elena didn't want Daniel's downfall to happen in a single night. She wanted him to soar as high as possible before crashing violently back to the ground. An hour later, her father arrived. Inside the soundproof study, Elena played the recording. Her father's reaction was exactly as she had anticipated. The old man's face flushed red as he struggled to contain his rage. His hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He reached for his phone, ready to call his lawyers and the police, prepared to have Daniel arrested immediately. Elena stopped him. Calmly, she laid out her plan. She asked her father to hold back, to remain kind to Daniel, to pretend that the $15 million would indeed be released soon. Elena explained that the most exquisite revenge was letting Daniel and Claire dig their own graves with their greed. Mr. Morgan looked at his daughter differently now. There was pride in his eyes, mixed with deep sorrow. He never imagined his gentle daughter would have to become this hardened. But in the end, he agreed to follow Elena's script. After her father left, Elena began crafting her strategy in detail. She cleaned the house as if nothing had happened. She even cooked Daniel's favorite dishes, just in case he returned early or to welcome him home properly. 2 days later, Daniel returned. The sound of his car entering the garage echoed through the house. Elena's heart raced, not from love, but from adrenaline. This was the first act of her performance. She walked to the front door, wearing the sweetest smile she could muster. When the door opened, Daniel appeared wearing a carefully rehearsed look of exhaustion. He immediately hugged Elena, complaining about how draining the journey had been and how heartbreaking it was to see his mother's condition. Elena returned the hug. Every cell in her body screamed in disgust, yet she held her breath so she wouldn't catch the faint scent of another woman's perfume lingering on his clothes. With a caring tone, she asked about Mrs. Helen Morgan's condition. Daniel lied smoothly, fabricating stories about medical diagnoses, expensive medications, and how his mother kept asking about Elena. Elena nodded sympathetically, mentally cataloging every lie as fuel for her hatred. She even offered to visit her mother-in-law the following week, which Daniel gently refused, claiming the doctor recommended strict isolation and total rest. That night was the hardest test, sleeping in the same bed as a traitor. Daniel fell asleep quickly, perhaps exhausted after enjoying time with Claire under the pretense of visiting his sick mother. Elena lay beside him, staring at the dark ceiling. The soft sound of his breathing, once comforting, now sounded monstrous. She turned toward him, studying his face in the darkness. That innocent sleeping face hid 1,000 deceptions. Barely audible, Elena whispered a promise. Every tear she shed today would be repaid with Daniel's blood-soaked sweat in the future. The next morning, Elena made her move. At breakfast, with sparkling eyes and a cheerful tone, she shared what seemed like wonderful news. She said her father had called, informing her that the asset liquidation for the $15 million was progressing faster than expected. Daniel froze. His spoon paused mid-air. Greed flashed unmistakably in his eyes. Though he tried to mask it with a grateful smile, he eagerly asked when the money would be available. Elena replied casually, perhaps in a week or two. However, there were some documents Daniel would need to handle regarding asset transfers to reduce tax obligations. A lie, of course, just a way to keep Daniel busy and convinced that victory was near. Daniel was ecstatic. He even forgot to pretend concern about his mother. He began rambling about his so-called business plans, speaking as if the money were already his. Elena listened attentively, offering supportive comments that made Daniel feel invincible. Midway through breakfast, Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and quickly turned it off. Elena asked innocently, "Who was calling?" "Just a colleague asking about project progress," Daniel replied. Elena smiled and nodded. Inside, she laughed. She knew it was Claire, and she knew Daniel couldn't wait to share the news about the money with Claire and with his mother. That was exactly what Elena wanted. The higher their hopes climbed, the harder they would shatter when they fell. That afternoon, Elena deliberately left the house, claiming she needed to do monthly grocery shopping. Her real intention was to give Daniel space to freely contact his accomplice. From the surveillance app she had secretly installed on Daniel's phone while he was showering that morning, Elena listened to their conversations in real time. As soon as she exited the gate, Daniel called Claire. His voice overflowed with euphoria. He shouted with joy, announcing their windfall was coming soon. He promised Claire a luxurious house in an elite neighborhood as a pregnancy gift. Behind the wheel, Elena smiled coldly. "Go ahead and dream, Daniel," she murmured, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Dream as high as the sky." Her revenge had only just begun. News of the impending $15 million release acted like gasoline poured onto Daniel's greed. His behavior changed drastically. He became impatient and impulsive. Every time his phone buzzed, he jumped with barely contained excitement, hoping it was the bank or a notary. Elena observed these changes with a knowing smile. Daniel began browsing luxury real estate listings and high-end automotive magazines on his tablet while lounging in the living room. He no longer bothered hiding his fascination for things far beyond his monthly salary. To Elena, this was confirmation. The bait had been swallowed, the big fish was hooked. All that remained was choosing the perfect moment to reel him in and let him suffocate. To accelerate her plan, Elena decided to raise the stakes. She wanted to see Claire. She wanted to watch the woman who stabbed her in the back perform directly in front of her. So that evening, in a casual tone, Elena proposed an idea to Daniel, inviting Claire over for dinner in 2 days. She said she missed her best friend and wanted to reconnect. She also suggested celebrating just a little the good news about her father's funds. Daniel looked startled. His face stiffened briefly, eyes darted nervously. Perhaps he feared their charade would unravel with both women in the same room. But greed and arrogance quickly took over. Daniel saw it as an opportunity to let Claire taste the luxury that would soon be theirs. He agreed enthusiastically, praising it as a wonderful idea. Dinner day arrived. Elena spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing an elaborate feast, as if welcoming royalty. She cooked Claire's favorite dishes, once gestures of friendship, now weapons of psychological warfare. The aroma filled the house, creating the illusion of a perfect home. That evening, the doorbell rang. Daniel rushed to open the door, behaving like a lovesick teenager, so different from the indifference he usually showed to Elena's other guests. Elena walked slowly from the dining room, steadying her breath and expression. When she saw Claire step inside, anger burned in her chest. Claire was dressed to impress, wearing tight clothing that accentuated her curves. Elena noticed the subtle changes in her body, especially the slight swelling of her abdomen, barely concealed. Elena embraced Claire warmly. To Claire, it felt normal. To Elena, it was a farewell hug, to a friendship already dead. Claire returned the hug awkwardly, her eyes flicking toward Daniel behind Elena with a mischievous smile. They thought Elena hadn't noticed, but she saw everything, clearly, through the reflection of the large mirror in the foyer. They sat at the beautifully set dining table. Grilled honey chicken, oxtail soup, and luxurious side dishes filled the table. No alcohol, only fresh orange juice and chilled mineral water, true to Elena's values that Claire had once mocked as old-fashioned. The atmosphere was strange. Daniel tried too hard with forced jokes. Claire laughed too loudly in response. Elena smiled politely, contributing only brief comments. Midway through dinner, Elena struck. She refilled Claire's empty glass with mineral water and looked at her intently, smiling ambiguously. "Eat more," Elena said calmly. "You look fuller lately. Your cheeks are rounder. Your aura feels different." She paused deliberately. Daniel and Claire's hearts nearly stopped. Then Elena continued gently. "You look like someone carrying great happiness." Claire's made-up face went pale. Her spoon clinked softly against the plate. Daniel choked on his drink, coughing awkwardly. Elena quickly handed him a napkin, patting his back affectionately. "Are you okay, Daniel?" she asked sweetly. "Such a big reaction just because I said Claire gained a little weight." Daniel shook his head frantically, claiming he'd just swallowed wrong. Claire forced a stiff smile, saying she must be overeating lately due to work stress. After that tense dinner night, Daniel Morgan became increasingly obsessed with money. Elena's casual remark about donating a portion of the funds sent him into near panic. In Daniel's mind, he had to secure assets or lock in massive financial commitments immediately, anything to prevent Elena from casually giving the money away to a charity foundation. In his narrow, poisoned mindset, fed constantly by Claire Bennett and his mother, the $15 million already belonged to him. It was, in his eyes, compensation for his patience in enduring Elena all these years. Daniel began leaving the house more frequently, claiming meetings with clients or project site surveys. In reality, he was hunting for luxury homes with Claire. Still shaken by Elena's sharp remarks at the dinner table, Claire now felt her position was threatened. She demanded Daniel buy her a house immediately as proof of his seriousness and as security for the future of the child she was carrying. She whined relentlessly, whispering fears into Daniel's ear that Elena could change her mind at any moment. They had to move fast. Daniel took Claire to visit a newly developed elite residential cluster on the outskirts of the city. The houses were classic modern in style, with towering pillars and grand facades, exactly Claire's dream. They stopped in front of the largest corner unit, a two-story mansion with a private pool and a spacious garden. Claire fell in love at first sight. She wandered through the rooms with shining eyes, already imagining herself as the lady of the house, hosting lavish parties, flaunting her wealth to her friends. She clung to Daniel's arm sweetly, declaring this was her dream home and that she refused to look at any others. The problem was the price. It was astronomical, far beyond Daniel's modest savings. The developer demanded a massive down payment and short-term installments to qualify for a special promotional price. Daniel was overwhelmed. He knew Mr. Richard Morgan's money hadn't been released yet, but Claire kept pushing, and Daniel feared losing the house and her. This was where Elena's role resumed. Already aware of her husband's movements through the GPS tracker in his car and reports from a private investigator hired by her father, Elena began pouring gasoline onto the fire. When Daniel came home looking stressed, Elena asked enthusiastically about his project. She pretended to have insider information from a friend in real estate, claiming that land prices in the exact cluster Daniel had visited would skyrocket next month. She encouraged him to be bold. This was the perfect moment for a major investment. And she reassured him once again that the $15 million would be released any day now. Elena's words worked like a hypnotic spell. Hearing support from his legitimate wife convinced Daniel that his reckless move was justified and safe. Still, Daniel needed immediate cash for the down payment and administrative fees, millions of dollars. No legitimate bank would approve such a loan on short notice, especially with his average credit history. Cornered and desperate, Daniel contacted an old acquaintance with access to non-bank lenders, high-level loan sharks. They could release millions within hours as long as he provided high-value property collateral. Daniel remembered the safe in Elena's home office. Inside it lay the deed to the luxury house they currently lived in. The house had been a wedding gift from Mr. Richard Morgan, though the deed was still officially under his father-in-law's name and merely entrusted to them. In his stupidity, Daniel believed he could borrow the deed temporarily, pawn it to secure funds for Claire's dream house, then redeem it the following week once the check cleared. He convinced himself Elena would never notice the document's absence for a few days. One afternoon, while Elena was away at her regular religious study gathering, Daniel slipped into the home office. His hands trembled as he dialed the combination he had secretly memorized. Click. The ope opened. Inside lay a brown envelope containing the deed. Daniel grabbed it, breathing heavily, feeling like a thief in his own home. He silenced his guilt by imagining Claire's happiness and the luxurious life awaiting him. He rushed the document to a notary office connected to the loan sharks. The improvement process was alarmingly fast. The collateral value far exceeded the loan amount. Daniel signed the debt agreement, its suffocating interest rates barely glanced at, his mind consumed by the zeros that would soon appear in his account. That evening, Daniel returned home beaming. The money had arrived. Millions of dollars now sat in his personal account, and he had already transferred the down payment to the developer. He felt brilliant, victorious. At dinner, Daniel ate heartily, smiling to himself. Elena observed him coldly from behind her teacup. She knew exactly what he had done. She knew the deed was gone. But Daniel didn't know one thing. The document he had pawned was a fake duplicate, deliberately placed in the safe by Elena days earlier. The original deed was safely stored in Mr. Richard Morgan's private bank deposit box. Daniel had just handed a forged document to ruthless loan sharks and signed a legally binding debt agreement under his own name. Daniel felt invincible. He even began acting slightly arrogant toward Elena, ordering her to cut back on household expenses despite having just wasted stolen money on his mistress. Elena obeyed obediently. Inside, she was counting down to his destruction. That night, Daniel slept soundly, dreaming of his new home with Claire. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, watching his peaceful, ignorant face. Daniel had dug a very deep hole and had just jumped into it willingly. Softly, Elena whispered, "Enjoy your last peaceful sleep. Tomorrow, your personal hell begins. The lifestyle trap has closed, and there's no spare key for you to escape." The mother arrives. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Morgan residence felt different. A quiet tension seeped through the solid walls of the luxurious house. Today, Mrs. Helen Morgan, Daniel's mother, was arriving from her hometown, claiming she missed her son and daughter-in-law. Elena knew better. Since Daniel had mentioned the upcoming $15 million disbursement, Mrs. Helen's attitude had shifted dramatically. Once too frail to travel, she now felt miraculously fit enough to endure hours of road travel. Elena greeted the news with an unreadable smile. The circle was complete. All key players in this betrayal had gathered on one stage, making it easier for Elena to observe them and destroy them all at once. She prepared the guest room meticulously, replacing the sheets and placing fresh flowers on the nightstand, the perfect welcome from a dutiful daughter-in-law, a role she would continue playing until the curtain fell in tragedy. Daniel's car entered the driveway as the sun climbed high. Elena stood at the front door, dressed neatly and modestly, a shawl draped gracefully over her shoulders. The car door opened. Out stepped Mrs. Helen Morgan, overdressed and dripping with gold jewelry, as if eager to display her status as the mother of a soon-to-be millionaire. She looked healthy, far from the image of a critically ill woman Daniel had described. Elena stepped forward respectfully and kissed her mother's hand. Mrs. Helen withdrew quickly, her eyes scanning the house like a building inspector searching for flaws. No warm hug, no genuine inquiry about Elena's well-being. Her first comments were sharp criticisms about the lawn not being neat enough and the gate paint looking dull, despite Elena having hired professional gardeners just a week earlier. Inside, Daniel carried his mother's oversized bags while Mrs. Helen strutted through the house like a queen inspecting her new palace. Elena headed to the kitchen to prepare refreshments. From the living room, her sharp ears caught a hushed conversation. Mrs. Helen impatiently questioned Daniel about the certainty of the $15 million, warning him to make sure the money didn't slip away and reminding him not to spoil Elena too much. Elena's blood boiled. The apple truly didn't fall far from the tree. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and returned with tea and pastries. As they sat together, Mrs. Helen began her When she picked up the bag from the car, Elena noticed how heavy it was. She carried it into the guest bedroom. Mrs. Helen was in the bathroom at the time. Elena did not waste this golden opportunity. Curiosity guided her hand as she carefully unzipped the bag just a little. She had no intention of stealing. She was only looking for proof. And sure enough, the instinct of a betrayed wife was razor sharp. From a slightly open side pocket, a strip of receipt paper peeked out. Elena's hand trembled as she pulled it free. It was a shopping receipt from a well-known baby supply store in the neighboring city. The date read 2 days ago, exactly when Daniel had asked permission to return to his hometown. Her eyes scanned the list of items: a full set of baby boy clothing, a high-end electric breast pump, a nursing pillow, and premium prenatal vitamins. The total amount reached thousands of dollars. At the bottom of the receipt was a loyalty point record under Daniel's member name. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. So the money she had given Daniel to buy medicine for his supposedly sick mother had instead been used to purchase baby supplies for his mistress, and Mrs. Helen, the woman who claimed to be gravely ill, had been right there shopping alongside him, choosing those sinful items. Elena immediately took out her phone and photographed the receipt from several angles, securing undeniable evidence. She then carefully returned the receipt to its exact original position, making sure nothing looked disturbed. When Mrs. Helen exited the bathroom, Elena was already standing by the window, adjusting the curtains. Her face was calm, betraying none of the rage burning inside. Mrs. Helen muttered a curt thank you, then ordered Elena to leave because she wanted to rest. Elena nodded obediently and closed the guest room door softly. The moment the door shut, Elena leaned against the hallway wall. Tears of fury slid down her cheeks one by one. She felt nauseated, disgusted by Daniel, disgusted by Claire, and most of all, disgusted by the hypocrisy of Mrs. Helen. The three of them had conspired to drain her wealth, mock her behind her back, all while enjoying the comfort and luxury she provided. Elena wiped her tears roughly. That receipt would be stored safely in a special envelope labeled "Evidence of Destruction." The envelope had grown thicker, heavy with their sins. There would be no mercy. If they wanted to play with fire, Elena would make sure they were burned to ashes without a trace. Mrs. Helen had arrived today carrying arrogance. She would leave carrying humiliation she would never forget for the rest of her life. The sun had begun to tilt westward, yet the dark clouds hanging over the city mirrored the mood inside the house. After finding the baby store receipt, Elena realized she could no longer sit quietly and wait for the fictional fund disbursement date. She had to accelerate their mental collapse. She needed to create cracks among the conspirators. Divide, destabilize, and conquer. Elena knew the bond between Daniel, Claire, and Mrs. Helen was not built on love. It was transactional, fueled by greed. And bonds like that were fragile, easily shattered by suspicion. Her first move was to buy a new prepaid SIM card, unregistered under her name. She inserted it into a spare phone hidden in the kitchen. Her first target was Claire. Pregnant women were emotionally volatile and prone to suspicion. Elena typed a short but lethal message and sent it to Claire's private number. "Be careful. The man who promised you a luxury house is playing with another woman besides his wife. Don't let yourself become a stepping stone. Check who he's been calling late at night." The anonymous message was sent while Daniel was at home, casually watching television with Mrs. Helen. Elena observed from across the room, waiting for the chain reaction. Less than 10 minutes later, Daniel's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. His face tightened. He grabbed the phone and hurried to the backyard, muttering something about bad signal. Elena knew Claire was exploding on the other end, demanding explanations about the other woman. While Daniel was busy calming Claire, Elena launched her second attack, this time aimed at the relationship between Mrs. Helen and Claire. She printed a brochure she had designed herself with convincing detail. It was an exclusive advertisement for Silver Sunset Retirement Residence, a luxurious yet remote nursing home. Elena circled several premium living packages with a red marker and added a handwritten note in a style deliberately resembling Claire's handwriting. Best option for Mom once we move into the new house. She slipped the brochure neatly into Daniel's work bag, lying in the living room, visible enough to be found. Elena knew Mrs. Helen's habit well. She loved snooping through her son's belongings, especially anything involving money or assets. The bait was taken. That afternoon, while Daniel was showering, Mrs. Helen opened his work bag, likely searching for documents related to the $15 million disbursement. Instead, she found the nursing home brochure. Elena, pretending to read a magazine on the opposite sofa, saw Mrs. Helen's face flush red. Her hands trembled as she read the handwritten note. She immediately concluded it was Claire's doing. The woman she had proudly praised as her ideal future daughter-in-law was in her mind already plotting to dump her in a nursing home once the money arrived. The fury of a parent who feels discarded is terrifying. Mrs. Helen crushed the brochure and shoved it into the pocket of her batik house dress, breathing heavily as she waited for the right moment to explode. That evening, dinner became a cold battlefield. Daniel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from arguing with Claire on the phone earlier. He tried to act sweet towards his mother, but Mrs. Helen responded with curt remarks and suspicious glares. Daniel was confused, unaware why his mother's attitude had suddenly changed. Elena, meanwhile, ate calmly. She occasionally offered dishes to her mother-in-law with a polite smile, one that only deepened Mrs. Helen's irritation. Mrs. Helen likely thought Elena was too naive to grasp the intrigue unfolding. In reality, Elena was the puppet master. The tension peaked when Daniel's phone rang again. This time he dared not answer. He stared at the screen in dread. Claire Bennett. Seeing Daniel hesitate, Mrs. Helen, now consumed by paranoia, snatched the phone. "Answer it. That illegitimate wife of yours must be calling to remind you to dump your own mother into a nursing home." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about? Who's trying to abandon you?" Mrs. Helen threw the crumpled brochure at his face. "Don't play dumb. I found this in your bag. Whose handwriting is that if not hers? Barely pregnant with an illegitimate child and already trying to control my life." Elena gasped theatrically, dropping her spoon and covering her mouth in mock shock. Daniel denied knowing anything about the brochure, but Mrs. Helen was already too hurt to listen. At that moment, Claire, furious that her calls kept being ignored, called again. Daniel answered on speaker, his hands busy holding back his hysterical mother. Claire's shrill voice filled the dining room. Without pleasantries, she screamed, "Daniel, don't you ignore me. If you don't transfer my extra monthly money tonight and explain who that other woman is, I don't care anymore. If the $15 million don't clear tomorrow, I will come to your house and expose everything to your so-called saint of a wife. Let it all burn." Silence fell. Instantly. Daniel went pale. Horror flooded his face as he turned to Elena. Mrs. Helen froze too, realizing Claire's threat could ruin their plan to seize Elena's wealth. Mother and son now stared at Elena in fear.
Elena had heard everything clearly. She slowly stood up, expressionless, walked over, took Daniel's phone, and calmly ended the call. She looked him straight in the eyes and said softly, but with deadly precision, "Daniel, your friend sounds like she's under a lot of stress, yelling about $15 million and all. Who exactly is she, and why does she sound so entitled to my father's money?" The question was simple and lethal. Daniel stammered, his tongue failing him. Cold sweat streamed down his temples. Mrs. Helen pretended to harden her face, trying to deflect attention. Elena gave a crooked smile, one that sent chills down Daniel's spine. Without waiting for an answer, Elena turned and walked towards her bedroom. "Settle your business with that friend."
As they stepped into the grand lobby with its gleaming marble floors, Daniel Morgan's courage shrank slightly. He had always felt small in the presence of his father-in-law, a man whose powerful leadership aura filled every room he entered. Still, the image of $15 million hardened Daniel's resolve once more. They were greeted by Mr. Richard Morgan's personal secretary, polite, professional, yet stern, who escorted them to the main boardroom on the top floor. It was a VVIP meeting room, normally reserved for shareholder summits or multi-billion-dollar contract signings. The room was vast, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table and plush leather chairs. Beyond the massive glass windows, the city skyline stretched endlessly, as if offering the world itself to anyone seated inside. At the head of the table sat Mr. Richard Morgan, already waiting. His face was calm, authoritative, and unreadable. He did not smile when his son-in-law and in-laws entered, only nodded briefly, signaling them to sit. Daniel, Mrs. Helen Morgan, and Claire Bennett sat in a row on one side of the table. Elena Morgan sat on the opposite side, directly beside her father. The seating arrangement unconsciously created a clear divide, us and them. Daniel attempted polite small talk, asking after his father-in-law's health, but received only a brief in response, enough to make his courage falter again. A notary and the company's legal counsel were already present, flipping through thick files. Their presence only reinforced the gravity of the meeting. Daniel's heart pounded. His eyes stayed fixed on the stack of documents he was convinced contained asset transfer papers and the promised check. Mrs. Helen clutched her handbag nervously. Claire tried to sit upright, though her back ached from pregnancy. Mr. Richard Morgan opened the meeting in his deep baritone voice. He spoke about the importance of trust and integrity in managing family assets. He emphasized those words deliberately, making Daniel feel faintly targeted, though he brushed the feeling aside. Mr. Richard then explained the complicated procedures of grant disbursement, taxation, management responsibility, and long-term commitments. Daniel nodded enthusiastically, agreeing to everything without really listening. There was only one thought in his mind. Where is the paper I need to sign so the money goes into my account? Mrs. Helen even interrupted with an innocent-sounding question about whether part of the money could be withdrawn in cash that very day. She was silenced by a sharp glance from the lawyer. After nearly an hour of tedious legal and business explanations, the moment Daniel had been waiting for finally arrived. Mr. Richard gestured to the notary. The notary slid a dark blue folder across the table toward Daniel. Daniel's hands trembled as he accepted it. Slowly, he opened the folder, expecting to see a check or legal documents. It was empty. Inside lay only a single sheet of blank white paper. Daniel frowned in confusion and looked up at his father-in-law. Mr. Richard gave a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Calmly, he said that before the original documents could be handed over, there was one absolute condition the grant recipient had to fulfill. That condition was verification of marital harmony through family documentation.
Daniel and Mrs. Helen exchanged confused glances. Family documentation? Did they need to take a family photo? Daniel quickly nodded, saying he was willing to do anything. He even wrapped an arm around his mother's shoulders, trying to demonstrate how harmonious they were. Claire, seated beside him, stayed silent, feeling oddly excluded from this happy family display. Mr. Richard then picked up a small remote control from the table and pressed a button. The automated curtains closed, dimming the room. A large projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling. Daniel smiled broadly. He assumed they were about to watch a wedding memory video or childhood photos of Elena, some nostalgic prelude to the inheritance. He prepared his most emotional expression. The projector lit up with a bright white screen, briefly dazzling their eyes. Then appeared an audio waveform. No images, only sound. The room fell into complete silence. Then the voice played, a voice unmistakably familiar, clear, undistorted. "Relax, baby. Once the $15 million check from that idiot's father clears, I'll divorce her, then the three of us and our child will enjoy the money together." Daniel's smiling face drained of all color, turning as pale as the blank paper in the folder. His eyes widened in horror, staring at the screen as if seeing a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His heart felt as if it had stopped. Before he could process what was happening, another voice followed. A woman's voice. "My best friend really is that stupid, isn't she?" It was Claire's voice. Claire jerked in her seat, instinctively covering her mouth. Her eyes flew to Elena in sheer terror. Then came their laughter, mocking, contemptuous, arrogant, once delicious to them, now ringing like a death knell. The recording continued, replaying their disgusting conversations about raising an illegitimate child with Mr. Richard Morgan's money, Daniel's disgust toward his wife, and how they thought Elena was naive. With every second, the air in the room grew thinner for Daniel, Claire, and Elena. Mrs. Helen, seated between them, looked as if she was having a mild stroke, her face frozen, breath shallow. She turned stiffly from her son to Claire, then to Elena, who sat perfectly calm. Elena did not look at the screen. She looked straight at the three of them, savoring every flicker of fear etched on their faces. Her gaze was cold, piercing, lethal. The gentle, obedient Elena was gone. What remained was a betrayed woman standing as judge over her betrayers. The recording ended with the dramatic click of a call disconnecting. The lights came back on, exposing the sweat-soaked faces of the guilty. The silence afterwards was far more terrifying than the recording itself. No one dared speak. Daniel's knees weakened. He gripped the chair's armrest to keep from collapsing. Then Mr. Richard placed the remote on the table with a sharp tap, a judge's gavel marking the start of the real trial. The VVIP boardroom turned into a frozen hell. The central air conditioning did nothing to stop the corn-sized beads of sweat rolling down Daniel's temples. He swallowed, his throat dry like sandpaper. Desperate, his scheming mind searched for excuses. Finally, with a violently shaking voice, Daniel stood. Pointing at the screen, he shouted hysterically that it was all a lie. He claimed the recording was fake, AI manipulation, fabricated evidence. He swore on God's name and on his mother's life that he had never said such vile things. He acted like a victim of cruel slander, hoping to spark doubt in his father-in-law's eyes. Mrs. Helen immediately joined in, tears flowing on command. She wailed that her son was pious, incapable of adultery or malicious intent. She even accused Elena of fabricating the recording out of blind jealousy or greed, wanting to control the inheritance alone. Claire said nothing. Her face was deathly pale, her head bowed low. Survival instinct told her words were useless now. Elena listened to all the denial with a mocking half-smile. Without a word, she opened her work bag, pulled out a thick brown envelope, and slid it across the table until it stopped against Daniel's water glass. "I can't fake ultrasound images and chat histories from your phone, Daniel," Elena said calmly, each word cutting to the bone. Daniel's hands shook violently as he opened the envelope. The contents spilled out. Ultrasound photos labeled with Claire Bennett's name and examination dates matching Daniel's supposed business trips. Printed screenshots of WhatsApp conversations, terms of endearment, secret marriage plans, complaints about Elena, and proof of monthly transfers Daniel sent to Claire. Worst of all, the baby store receipt Elena found in Mrs. Helen's bag, complete with Daniel's loyalty member number. Physical, concrete, undeniable. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the ultrasound image. He was finished, completely finished. Mrs. Helen froze upon seeing the receipt, her face burning red with shame and fear. She realized her carelessness had become another nail in her son's coffin. Mr. Richard Morgan finally stood. His tall frame radiated restrained fury. In a voice that was calm yet absolute, he delivered the verdict. There was no $15 million. There never had been. The disbursement story was bait suggested by Elena to draw out their greed. Then he pointed directly at Daniel. Daniel was fired from his position in the subsidiary effective immediately. All company assets, car, laptop, corporate credit cards were revoked and blocked on the spot. Daniel didn't just lose.
Elena then slipped her wedding ring off her ring finger. The white gold ring set with a diamond, the one Daniel had once placed there with vows of loyalty. She stared at it briefly. Then, with a light flick of her wrist, dropped it onto the floor right in front of Daniel's tear-soaked face. The sharp clink of metal against polished marble echoed through the silent room. "Take it, Daniel," Elena said calmly. "That's the only asset left from our marriage. Sell it to buy milk for your child and Claire's. Or maybe it'll cover your bus fare home, since the car downstairs has already been confiscated by my father's company driver." Her tone was final. There was no trace of sorrow, only profound relief. It felt as if a crushing weight had just been lifted from her shoulders. Daniel stared blankly at the ring, then up at Elena, who stood tall and unshakable, like a tower that could not be moved. Moments later, building security entered at the secretary's request. They dragged Daniel, still sobbing hysterically, along with Mrs. Helen Morgan, who kept half fainting, and Claire Bennett, who walked out with her head lowered in shame. Daniel's wails echoed down the corridor until the elevator doors closed, carrying away the discarded remnants of Elena's former life. Elena let out a long breath. She turned and embraced her father. Her defenses cracked slightly. Tears fell, but not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. She had won. She had survived, and she was ready to let karma work in its own far crueler way beyond those walls. The midday sun burned mercilessly, scorching anyone exposed beneath it. On the sidewalk in front of Mr. Richard Morgan's magnificent corporate headquarters stood 3 figures, hollow-faced and painfully out of place. Daniel Morgan, Mrs. Helen Morgan, and Claire Bennett had just been forcibly expelled by security. They stood stunned at the edge of the noisy main road, dust swirling against faces still damp with cold sweat and tears. The luxury company car they had proudly arrived in that morning had already been returned to the corporate garage. Daniel's wallet was empty, his credit cards were blocked, and the wedding ring Elena had thrown earlier lay abandoned on the boardroom floor, forgotten in his panic. They had nothing left but the clothes on their backs and unbearable shame.
Passers-by stared openly. Mrs. Helen sat limply on the filthy sidewalk, still wearing an eye-catching formal dress completely unsuited to the scene. Claire sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her pregnant belly, and Daniel, still in his tailored suit, looked like a man who had lost his sanity. The silence broke when Mrs. Helen began blaming everyone. With a hoarse voice, she struck Daniel's arm, screaming about her fate now. She demanded accountability for dragging her all the way from their hometown only to humiliate her like this. Then she turned on Claire, pointing a trembling finger at her face, accusing Claire of being bad luck incarnate. If Claire had never seduced Daniel, Mrs. Helen insisted, Elena would never have become so ruthless, and she would still be enjoying luxury in her daughter-in-law's home. Claire, emotionally unstable from her pregnancy, snapped. She screamed back in a shrill voice, declaring herself the victim of Daniel's sweet lies. She said she agreed to be his mistress because she was promised wealth, not poverty and public humiliation on a roadside. Their vicious argument became free entertainment for nearby rideshare drivers. Daniel ignored them both. His mind was consumed by a terror far greater than his mother's scolding. The loan sharks. Today was the due date for the first interest payment and full repayment if he wanted his property certificate back. But the certificate he had pledged was fake, and he had not a single dollar. With trembling hands, Daniel pulled out his phone, dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers. His heart nearly stopped. Before he could turn it off and run, a message appeared. "We know where you are. Run, and your mother becomes collateral." Daniel froze. From around the corner, 3 black sport motorcycles rolled slowly against traffic and stopped right in front of them. The riders were large men in black leather jackets with menacing faces. They dismounted casually, but their presence was pure intimidation. Daniel recognized one of them, the trusted enforcer of the loan shark boss. The man removed his helmet, flashing a crooked grin of yellowed teeth. He stepped closer and lightly slapped Daniel's cheek, soft yet painful. In a falsely friendly tone, he asked where their money was. Daniel stammered, lying about a banking delay and promising payment tomorrow. The man laughed loudly. The sound made Claire scream and hide behind Mrs. Helen. Grabbing Daniel by the collar, he pulled him close and hissed that their boss had already verified the certificate with the National Land Registry that morning. It was fake. Daniel hadn't just borrowed money, he had frauded criminals who lived outside the law. And that world punished far more brutally than any court. With a signal, 2 others seized Daniel, twisting his arms behind his back. Daniel screamed, begging for mercy, claiming ignorance. They dragged him toward a black van that had just stopped nearby. Mrs. Helen went hysterical, clinging to one of the men, begging them to release her only son. She was shoved aside and fell on the burning asphalt. Her knee scraped open, her expensive dress smeared with dust. Meanwhile, Claire tried to flee. She didn't care about Daniel or Mrs. Helen anymore, only about herself and her unborn child. But karma wasn't done. A police patrol car screeched to a halt in front of her. 2 female officers stepped out and blocked her path. They showed her an arrest warrant. Elena had kept her word. Claire was charged with embezzlement. Money Elena had entrusted to her, monthly expenses and social fund payments, had been skimmed for personal use. The evidence was airtight. Cold handcuffs snapped around Claire's wrists as she was escorted into the patrol car, sobbing as her life collapsed in mere hours. 6 months passed. Time moved differently for everyone. Daniel's days crawled painfully behind prison bars. convicted of document forgery and fraud, stripped of all arrogance. His head shaved, body gaunt, he slept curled on cold concrete floors, haunted by regret. He missed Elena, not out of love, but because he finally realized how foolish he'd been to trade a diamond for sharp gravel. Claire's fate was no kinder. Her trial delayed due to pregnancy, she lived under strict supervision in absolute poverty. She gave birth in a small public clinic with minimal facilities, alone. The baby boy arrived not into luxury, but into hardship. Claire worked odd washing jobs, carrying her baby with her once beautiful face now dull and aged. Mrs. Helen spent her remaining years in lonely disgrace back in her village, sick, isolated, and full of regret. In stark contrast, Elena Morgan's life flourished. Free from parasites, she focused on expanding her father's legacy. She transformed the company, introduced innovation, and drove profits upward. Her elegance grew, her smile now calm and genuine. One bright afternoon, Elena sat at her favorite outdoor cafe, sipping warm chamomile tea as the breeze played gently with her shawl. Her phone vibrated. An unknown number from the region where Daniel's prison was located. She knew. Once she might have answered. Now she simply pressed decline, then blocked. Elena smiled softly, lifted her face to the golden sky, and breathed in freedom. Her life had begun again, and this time she was the author of her own story.